Researchers aren't sure why strong relationships in adolescence seem to pay dividends later in life, but one hypothesis is that those bonds act as a buffer against depression and insults. Maria Fabrizio Fornper. Researchers aren't sure why strong relationships in adolescence seem to pay dividends later in life, but one hypothesis is that those bonds act as a buffer against depression and insults. David Thomas and I met when we were about 5 years old. We celebrated his 26th birthday last weekend, marking roughly 2 decades of friendship. Once, while walking down the street, a man looked at us and said, "Ain't it Harold and Kumar?" He was almost certainly making light of our race, but perhaps he also saw how comfortable we were with each other. The comparison fits in more ways than one since David is my oldest and closest friend. David is an MD-PhD student now, and I'm a science reporter. We've both read research on the effect friendships can have on mental health, and a study published Monday in Child Development seemed particularly relevant to us. The research suggests that bonds from adolescence might have an outsized role in a person's mental health for years. The findings are giving us some good evidence for the importance of adolescent friendships, not just short-term but into adulthood, says Catherine Bagwell, a psychologist at Emory University's Oxford College, who was not involved with the study. We haven't had too many robust, rigorous findings like this. The researchers followed 169 people for 10 years, starting when they were 15 years old. At age 15 and again at 16, the participants were asked to bring in their closest friends for one-on-one interviews with the researchers. They were asked how much trust there is, how good communication is and how alienated they feel in the relationship, says Rachel Nair, the lead author on the study and a doctoral student in psychology at the University of Virginia. Each year, the original participants were also given questionnaires to assess levels of anxiety, depression and self-worth. Nair says that when she watched videos made in the early years of the study of the teens asking their best friends for advice or support or talking through a disagreement, it was easy to tell which relationships were strong. These teens tend to be open with one another about difficult topics, and they're more engaged with one another and helping the other person and connecting with the other person, she says. Those strong relationships are paying dividends in adulthood, the study found. When the researchers evaluated the participants at the conclusion of the study, the ones who had close, emotional links showed improvement in their levels of anxiety, depression and self-worth. In other words, they reported less depression and anxiety and more self-worth at 25 than they had at 15 and 16. It surprised me how much better they were doing, Nair says. While the researchers believe there is more driving the drop in depressive symptoms than just the friendships, they're confident the strong relationships play a meaningful part. Those who had more stable relationships, who brought the same best friend to the study at 15 and again at 16, seem to do the best, Nair says. The participants who didn't exhibit the same kind of closeness with their friends didn't show much change in symptoms of depression and anxiety or in their sense of self-worth over the study's 10 years. Nair and her colleagues also looked at how popular or well-liked the participants were at 15 or 16 to see whether those factors had more to do with the drop in depression and rise in self-worth than having close friends. But the researchers only saw a correlation with strong friendships. It's tough to know exactly what is going on, but Bagwell says psychologists have a few good ideas. One is that unwavering support acts as a kind of protective buffer against insults to your self-worth or feelings of depression. That can be especially beneficial during adolescence, a formative period when peer feedback has extra gravity. Nair adds. These friendships could help with people's emotional development, too. Adolescent relationships might help people learn certain social and emotional skills that benefit them for life, says Brett Lyorson, a psychologist at Florida Atlantic University. Like Bagwell, though, he is quick to point out the caveat that science hasn't pinpointed the exact mechanism. Most of this is purely speculative, he says. Hand-waving. In his own work, Lauerson found that people with teen friendships were happier by the time they were nearly 50 years old compared with those without friends as adolescents. Bagwell raises the element of timing. For the first time in their lives, teenagers are able to form deep ties with their peers, she says. It's the kind of relationship that teens are developmentally ready for. It's the first opportunity for people to learn how to be trusting and vulnerable. Wit.